Hello, hello. Can everyone hear me? No one's probably here yet. Cool. Just getting set up. Welcome to the stream. Hello, friends. Today I am going to talk about a live set that I just did 2 weeks ago. I was invited to perform downtown in LA, and I put together a live set entirely from these pieces that you see on camera. And I wanted to go over just kind of how it went down, because I felt pretty good about the performance, and so I wanted to go over the anatomy of this particular set. I started from scratch. I did it in about 2 to 3 weeks. And yeah, so I just want to go over what it involved, what kinds of things I had in mind when I started. So let's just get started. Basically, before I started this set, I had a few parameters in mind that I wanted to try. I wanted to involve the Octatrack pretty heavily. I wanted to have no keyboard, and I wanted to do everything in the box, so no improvisation actually this time around. If you've seen my videos before, you'll know that I typically rely on improvisation to build a set, and that's something that I really enjoy doing. But this time around, I thought it'd be fun to make a set and to just perform it along the parameters, to use some of the internal structure of the Octatrack to actually build the set. So this time around, I actually focused on doing just that. I use patterns, I use parts, I use banks, and I'm really just trying to see what the Octatrack does best. And so this kind of became an experiment in what kinds of things can be exciting about just working inside the box, inside this particular box. So those were some of the parameters initially. There are some additional ones that came about just like over time. I knew I wanted to use some kind of synth, and I ended up using the Minotaur because I haven't used it in a while and I really wanted to explore that. It sounds great, for one thing. But I basically used that as my baseline for the whole set. I also wanted to make sure that I used some kind of samples. I didn't want to use voice because I didn't want to deal with feedback or anything like that. So for this set, which you can find on my channel in the description, I basically designed the whole set to have vocal samples. And the samples that I found were actually from a documentary called Symbiotic Earth, which I can also link in the chat or in the description later on. But it's a documentary about microbiology, and the artist that I was invited to play with is a fellow enjoyer of the author Donna Haraway, who's also a scientist and professor, and she wrote the Cyborg Manifesto as well as Staying with the Trouble. And so I thought it'd be fun to use a biology documentary to serve as sort of like the thematic anchor for this set. What else? Oh, I wanted to make sure that I use distortion. My analog heat, which is usually my weapon of choice for distortion, is actually kind of messed up right now. The power supply isn't working, so I can't use that. But instead, today we are working with the Unfiltered Audio Dent 2, which is a plugin that I highly recommend. I will also link that in my description. But it sounds great. So if you hear any distortion on this particular program, that is coming from my computer, and the signal is being fed into my desktop, which is playing the distortion. Before I go any further, I also want to just do a little bit of a self-plug and say my album is coming out October 14th, and you can find a link to my page on Spotify if you want to support me. Just be sure to like and subscribe so that this video and my channel can be shared with more and more Octatrack users. And also follow me on Spotify so that you can get updates to my music and my releases as they come out. So let's begin. Basically, I organized this set into patterns, banks, and parts. If you have used the Octatrack before, you'll be pretty familiar with this. And I should also say that this particular stream, I'm going to be going into some advanced Octatrack usage, so I may not stop to explain what everything is. If you're looking for something a little bit more, I guess, simplified or introductory, this is not the video. Maybe just like go to some of my earlier videos and I can talk about some of those things. But my channel in general is not really for basic Octatrack usage. So I came up with this idea to use 4 patterns per track. So I made all of these tracks from scratch. And I know that there's 4 parts per bank. A part is basically a set of parameters. It includes which samples are assigned to which tracks. It includes what kinds of tracks are on each, what kinds of machines are on each track. And so I wanted to make sure that I used all 4 parts of each bank, because every bank has a unique set of 4 parts. So in this particular set, I basically designed it around having 4 patterns per bank. So that way I could have these parts evenly distributed. So patterns 1 through 4, part 1, patterns 5 through 8, part 2, and so on. And so once I ran out, I would just move to bank 2. And this is kind of how I constructed my set. Generally speaking, I used a similar set of sounds, and I put them in similar places. I tried to keep it consistent, but in the heat of creativity, I ended up kind of shuffling things around from time to time. And that was some of the things that kind of made it a little confusing for me. But for the most part, the kick is in the 6th channel. The bass, which is the Minotaur, is coming out of the 7th channel, or sorry, the 8th channel. And the 7th channel is actually for samples. So this is where I put all of my samples from this biology documentary that I was talking about, Symbiotic Earth. And you'll find throughout the set that I actually used that channel I would trigger it manually a lot of the time, because
these microbes are out there and they've been here for about 500 million years.
Because I liked that when I'm performing, I'm not just hitting play, or I'm actually triggering when the sample happens. And I enjoy having some control over that rather than sort of having it start with the pattern. So you'll see that throughout this explanation, through this walkthrough. Track 5, I want to say things start to get a bit more confusing between tracks 1 through 5, because sometimes these are sound design elements, sometimes they're loops. And I used almost entirely static machines because it's very easy to run out of the space that a flex machine takes up in your audio pool. Flex machines and static machines are handled a little bit differently on the Octatrack. I believe flex machines are, the audio pool of the flex machines is assigned to your RAM, while the static machines pull from the hard drive or whatever it's called. So the trade-off of that is flex machines are much more responsive, but there's a much smaller limit to how much space you can take up. Whereas with static machines, it's just drawing on the full space of the memory card. So let's just get into it. My first inspiration for this project was Blawan, who is a techno producer, and they tend to create these very organic sounds. And because my thematic core of this project was microbiology and sort of like the bacteria that connect us all, I wanted to sort of create a form of techno that felt, or at least start with a form of techno that felt organic. And so this is what it sounds like. Well, actually, I'll start with the sample that I use in the very beginning of the set. I triggered this sound.
These microbes are out there and they've been here for about 500 million years. And if you listen very carefully, you can hear them singing. They're singing in English to help us out tonight. The song is, got along without you before I met you, didn't get along without you now.
So just a quick recap of what you're hearing right now. This is a sample from a documentary called Symbiotic Earth. It's one of my favorite documentaries. And what you're hearing right now is a set of tones generated from the song that is played in the documentary. I ran it through a plugin on my computer. So I prepared some of these samples beforehand on Ableton, and I did some effects to them so that they would run really long. So this track, for example, starts with the vocal sample, and then it loops this kind of eerie tone sequence indefinitely. So we're going to move to the next part that comes up. So there's a few things going on here right now. To start with, we have the Minotaur, which is triggered by the MIDI page of the Octatrack. I have it assigned to program 0, which would correspond to the first patch on this machine. I designed the Minotaur patches in tandem with my computer because there's a really helpful interface for that. But basically, I used the Minotaur, I used this loop as the basis. The clicking sound you hear is this contact mic loop set from Patches that I really enjoy. And I essentially just found little spots of it. I didn't even slice this, but I chose to pitch it up and do some odd manipulations to get a certain rhythm that I liked, but I really just felt it out. So as I mentioned before, my set is separated into tracks, and these tracks were designed to be 4 patterns each. So essentially I have 4 patterns to develop this idea. And once I exhausted those 4 patterns, I would move on to a new idea, and I would just kind of keep going in that way. The Fader Fox is being used to trigger, to control 6 of these tracks. So I put tracks 7 and 8 as tracks that I wouldn't necessarily need to mix. But going top to bottom, we have track 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 is my kick, so I can control the kick separately. So I've been practicing, rolling down the volume, or doing a low cut, or a high cut. And then release is this column here. The thing I used the most on this Fader Fox turned out to be this row, and specifically because, having access to the kick is such an important part of the DJ set. I actually ended up doing my scenes last throughout the whole project because I found it easiest to start with all the ideas and just get through what ideas I wanted to cover. And then afterwards, I found ways to expand each of those ideas, make them longer. And the set overall was about 36 minutes. So let's go to pattern 3. So this particular pattern doesn't have a kick, and structurally I like to do that at least once in this 4 pattern series because I feel like it helps create a natural flow. Give me a second, I'm unplugging my laptop. What's cool about this too is I can control Yes, to answer your question, yes, the fader fox is there to give me access to parameters without having to jump between pages. So normally I would have to make sure I was on the right page to control this volume of track 2, right? But instead I can just use this to manipulate the volume of this track. And I don't have to be on that page. And I also noticed that when I was performing, it was actually quite easy to switch back to previous patterns. And just use the Minotaur to kind of like add new ideas. So I'll show you some of these other patterns as we continue. I have three scenes that are kind of designed to do different things. So this one was really just changing the starting point of this loop here, which I found helpful. This other one, what does this one do? This one actually mutes this track and lets this other track sort of take center stage. And it also mutes half of the through machine, so I'm getting kind of like a different rhythm with the bass line. Thanks for dropping by, Zach. I really appreciate that. So the third scene here is special because I basically designed it to do some new stuff with this first track, and let's see if I can. And it's actually also manipulating this one and slowing it down, so if I isolate this piece, So, I think we're ready to move on. The second set of patterns is kind of referencing this first four. And this is a very slowed down sample from a track, the BGs of a track that I have, that I produced. Let's see, where is it? Right here. Let's see what this sounds like. Right, so it's from a song where the hook is collapse. It's actually on my upcoming album, which is coming out in October, so follow me on Spotify so you can hear it. Anyway, I like to take old samples that are just sitting on the Octatrack and make them new, do something new with them, compost them, in other words. And I felt that that was really on theme with thematically what I'm going for in this set, which is about the organic. It's about things being growing from dead material, things kind of refusing and finding new connections. So moving on. So I can go ahead and mute some of these so you can hear what's going on. Obviously kick. Nothing in this track. This is from the previous pattern, so you probably recognize this sound. This is a chain that I have, which I actually made this chain from a beat that I was working on. But it's just super distorted, and it's cut in half in terms of speed. And this one's actually the same loop as the one in track 4, but it's just a different part. Right, so this track is sliced into 31 slices, and this one is not using slices, it's just using a random start point. But track 2 is using a version of the file that is sliced. And then I just kind of like tweaked it so that it would match rhythmically. This scene is doing some more adjustments. It changes the start point of this track, so you get a completely different. And the goal is to really just be able to play the crossfader, give myself enough parameters that the track will sound good if I don't touch anything, but then allow these scenes to manipulate the track enough that suddenly it sounds like a new thing. So then pattern 3 of this set of 4, pattern 7 in other words, pretty much just adds in that vocal sample again. Yeah, so oftentimes when I had something like this where my crossfader was controlling a different start point of a loop, the most intuitive place to put that is like as a fill, right? Right, one more time. And so I just kind of like learned these moves. So this particular track is interesting, and I'll repeat again that a lot of these ideas kind of came about when I revisited the set after I had created all of the patterns I wanted to make, and I started to find ways to explore the same pattern through scenes, because scenes are super, super powerful. It's like kind of having access to a part, but being able to gradually move it. So right, like this could be its own pattern. So what I did for this particular scene and this pattern was I created a bunch of trigs in my chain track. So let's just isolate this. Let's just have the kick so that we know where we are. right? So this is a track in itself too. You just mute different things and suddenly you have your own, another layer, another arrangement. But you'll notice that there are certain patterns, certain trigs in here that aren't being played. And part of that is because I have them set to be muted. So they have p-locks on them that have them playing at 0, or sorry, -64. So they're not playing out. But then I mapped a crossfader scene to the volume of this track. And volume actually, volume for scenes supersedes volume of p-locks. So you can basically bring out certain trigs that have been muted by p-locks if you assign the volume of that particular track to your scene. I hope I said that clearly. So right? And this is also swung a little bit, I think. Nope, it's not actually. So those are the 3 scenes for this set of patterns. So we're going to move on to third set in this bank. And this is where we get into more break beats. This one is a little bit odd, personally, I find, but so my breaks are in track 5 here. My tambourine is in track 3. And then I have this sort of like note stuff in track 1. Pattern 11 is the 3rd pattern in this set, and it's sort of like a breakdown, so the kick is out. And I have this track sort of hidden in the back that I need to remember to bring in. So if you've seen some of my videos that talk about breakdowns, or sorry, break-based beats, there are some things that I like to do in scenes to play with these, and I can break them down real quick here. No pun intended. So here we are, track 5 is my breaks. You'll notice I have a set of parameters that are being changed by this scene. Specifically, I'm just moving around which slice starts this. This break sounds like it's being played in order, but really it's being triggered in these particular spots. It just so happens that I've designed the LFO to match the speed of the sample as it's being played. So without any alterations, we're on slice 9. We have an LFO that's running low to high at 16. So it's basically playing slice 1 at the beginning and slice 16 at the very end. And you'll see, or actually, it's not because it's p-locking these different ones. But I've basically set this so that it will start to move the LFO because it's not p-locked here. This is the original movement of the LFO, but these p-locks are keeping it frozen in one particular spot. These other scenes also manipulate the same parameter. Or you'll see that they change the speed of the LFO, which means that the LFO is hitting different spots on the sample. And what's cool about this is like I can actually just do whatever I want with this crossfader. I don't actually know exactly what's going to happen. But it always sounds good because I've sliced it so that the samples will match the beat in some pleasing way. It's kind of hard to demonstrate. Well, let's do it this way. They're sliced in a particular way that makes them pleasing, so that whichever one you hit, it actually sounds okay. And I don't really know how to explain that. I just kind of auditioned them and did it that way. But one rule of thumb would be to not slice the sample too much, because you don't want to hit like a 3rd 16th note as the start in a breakbeat, because you're less likely to enjoy the sound of like the 3rd 16th note than you are to enjoy like either the kick or the snare or something that has more weight to it, that has a certain pattern afterwards. Obviously, these are all just like general rules of thumb. If you hear something that you like, stick with it. But this is what's worked for me. Because I'm basically telling it to play these different spots, and any of the ones that have been sliced seem to work. And when I was actually designing this, all I really cared about was that when I push it to the far right, does it sound good? So I figured if that sounds good, then anything in between will just be kind of the cherry on top. This scene, I can't remember what this does. Ah, that's right. So you'll notice that my retrig is on 1 and the retrig time is on 1 as well. What this means is that the sample will not retrigger at all because it's on 1. If I were to set this to 2, then you would hear it playing a second trig for every time you hit. Right? And then if you add that to infinity, suddenly you get this like crazy IDM-y sort of thing. So I figured the best way to make that sound good, I could use this as an effect, but this isn't something I would want to leave on. So I assigned a scene to basically manipulate the retrig amount so that when I'm performing, I can use this as a sort of fill. just to get kind of a glitchy effect. I'm personally not a huge fan of the glitchy effect in general, so you won't find me doing that a ton, but I figured with breakbeats and with something this quick, it'd be fun to just kind of experiment with that this time. And what's cool too is that I can sort of use this scene in tandem with the other ones. So it takes a bit of getting used to the hand motions, but if I start with, for example, scene 15, which is this sort of like yeah, you can get some really good effects. And so the idea was to create a game that I could play while I'm performing. So I know that the beat sounds good. How do I extend the life of that beat? How do I play with it? How do I create parameters that will always sound good, but then find a way that I can be playing this game where I'm switching between different effects and getting new configurations that I might not have heard of. And what's cool about that is that once I learn what sounds good, then I'm learning the muscle memory of how to make that thing happen. So I can't really describe what it is, but I've learned, for example, that moving between these sounds good. And then at the very end, if you throw in this sort of like retrig thing, that's a great way to create a certain sound that makes sense that you've heard before, where you put that sort of glitchiness at the very, very end, right before the beat resets. It doesn't make sense at the beginning as much. Right. So let's move on to the next. We've got 4 more patterns in this set. This is where things get a little bit more open-ended. And one of the things that I really wanted to explore in this set was to go from something that was very like technical and experimental, uses a lot of electronic sounds, to dropping out the beat, because I know how from experience, I've noticed how the beat can sort of become a bit monotonous over time, and you just need like some way to get away from that, change tempos, for example. And I find that changing tempos the way a DJ might, where you just kind of slowly up the tempo, isn't really my style, especially with the Octatrack, where you have these separate patterns. It just doesn't make as much sense to do that. So one thing that I prefer to do is to actually have entire sections where the beat drops out. And since I'm sampling this documentary, this biology documentary, I figured every bank I would have like a set of tracks that was just kind of like this sort of ambient thing that I could play some of these samples. So that's what this is. So I have the Minotaur going in the background. It's just playing a note. And as I mentioned before, my samples, I typically put them in track 7. That's one track away from the ones that I can control on here. But I figured once I'm triggering them, which is usually by hand, I will have my hand on the volume here, and I'll be kind of manipulating it. I also did some things with scenes in this particular section. I liked this because I was basically kind of reducing the volume and adding some different distortion effects to the tracks. And what this allowed me to do was kind of like pull back the accompaniment so that if the vocal was getting covered up, I could actually adjust that. I also did this thing where I did a retrig on the vocals and made the retrig time super short. And you'll hear that. It creates this sort of a glitchy effect so that when I start the sample, it starts in this place that's sort of drawn out and then the sample plays.
The biosphere is entirely dominated by the microbial world. And animals and plants find themselves embedded in that world, dramatically affected by that world.
Let's play that one more time.
The biosphere is entirely dominated by the microbial world. And animals and plants find themselves embedded in that world, dramatically affected by that world.
This particular section, this file, is actually a set of different samples that I changed together. I basically put them all in the same file, and then I put them in the Octatrack and gave them different slices. So that's what you see here. This is 4 slices that are different clips. I didn't do the vocal mixing super well, so that's why in this next section, these are actually triggered by the pattern because I needed to p-log a different volume value for each one to make sure that it sounded relatively equal. But I created this game where like the crossfader kind of needs to go to the right before so that the glitchy effect can occur.
You have a symbiotic relationship with your eyelash mites and, of course, your underarm bacteria. You're between the toes bacteria. So if you feel you're falling apart, it's because you're falling apart.
And so when I see an animal like ourselves, I'm also seeing us as containers for bacteria and scaffolding for bacteria.
These kinds of symbiogenetic events, that is, the living together of organisms with very different abilities that lead to new tissues, new organs, new forms, to me is the major mechanism of change in the fossil record and in evolution.
So this is how I transition into bank 2. So let's see. So it took a bit of time to get that to sound right, but this is a completely different Minotaur patch. It just happens to start with the same sound. Pretty fun. I haven't done that before. So I should explain what's going on here. So obviously we have our kick. Nothing's happening in 5 yet. What's happening in track 4 is pretty unique. I've never tried this before. But this is a loop. But it's been sliced into different sections, right? And I have a loop going. How long is this loop? 8 steps. But what's kind of weird about this is the start point of the loop is synchronized to the pattern. So you're hearing it, it sounds like it's looping as though nothing is happening, but what's actually happening is there's a free moving LFO that's synchronized to hit the same spot at the same rate that this 8-step pattern is playing, if that makes sense. Why did I make it so complicated? Because my scene is affecting the speed and depth of that parameter. So the moment I manipulate that with the crossfader, I'm setting a different spot that this sample will be triggered. And from that point, these trigs are now looping a different spot. So this allows me to change the spot every time I want. So for example, we start with this, right? If I go like this, different one. Different one. But again, there are limitations to what's going on because this isn't just a start point. These are sliced. So once again, I'm not picking at random. I'm not picking a random point in the sample. I've sliced it so that the options are all going to sound decent. And you'll notice even if I hit play at a different time, since this is a LFO that's set to free, the LFO is going on in the background even when I don't hit play. So depending on when I hit it, I get a different. So this adds like a certain level of randomness to the set that I really enjoy. So even if I don't like the first one that plays when the set starts, I can change it until I like it. And there's something kind of fun about that where I'm not fully in control and I'm sort of like sculpting it as I go. And of course, there's other ways to keep the track sounding cohesive. So I have a tambourine here that's sort of like, and then there's other elements. And then we have this track here. So this one is a little bit more straightforward. It's really more like a quote-unquote melody that I created out of these sounds. But it's just got some effects on it, like a trig-based width LFO that kind of creates that sort of swooshing effect because it's doing it to the filter. But I just like the way that sounded, so I p-locked it to sound that way. So this is giving you something that's a little bit more consistent from moment to moment, and then I can have something random in the background. Trying to figure out where that vocal is. Oh, it's here, isn't it? Yeah, it's in track 7. And this is also p-locked. Oh, another thing that I should add in this particular section, I've been using this for the whole set, but I have a chain that is made up of tambourine loops, and I find this really useful. It's surprising how helpful a tambourine loop can be, especially in techno, or at least in the kind that I like making. So if you listen to this whole thing, each one is about a beat in length. And I've been really enjoying just using these different ones. I've sliced them up so that I can choose which one I'm playing. And it always fits. And so I'm triggering different parts of that loop, right? Oops. Oh. Also, scene 16 is actually doing some really fun stuff to this particular track. I'm basically extending the release. And it's adjusting the delay on the vocal sample. Right, so here we are in pattern 5 of bank 2. It's hard to explain how I came to these conclusions or decided to make these particular tracks, but I kind of just went with the flow. Like, I was just like, well, what do I want to hear next? And so that's kind of what happened next. This sort of like another thing that another design philosophy of this set was that I would start with scene 16, and then I would work my way this way, backwards basically, to create different scenes that might work. And then the last scene would be the one that would basically be a signal that I've done everything like play-wise, and now I'm ready to move on to the next section. What is the MIDI controller? So the MIDI controller is a Fader Fox PC4, and it's one of the few MIDI controllers you can find that actually that accepts MIDI cables. You need an adapter that goes from like an 1/8 inch to MIDI. But I've basically kind of picked this up because most of the other ones take USB, and you can't plug a USB into another USB like this. Like the Octatrack doesn't do that. So this has sort of been my weapon of choice for MIDI control. And what it does is it just helps me mix what's going on here, so that I don't have to jump between pages. So I have the volumes of tracks 1 through 6 assigned to the first column. I have low cut, high cut, and then release of samples. So for example, Track 3 is my 808 chain. I could adjust the release, or I can make it long. And then I could sort of bring it down. Something I should add too is, this is one of my favorite parts of the set because it just felt so good to arrive here. And it also involves one of the moves that I designed that I really enjoy, which is really simple. Basically, I assigned, if you're familiar with using sample chains on the Octatrack, essentially you take an audio file, and the Octatrack comes preloaded with some of these samples from the company Samples from Mars, which make awesome, analog samples from real machines, and then they sell them online. So look up Samples from Mars if you haven't already. They sell them like super cheap, and they sound great. But basically, you have a chain of sounds that correspond to different drum machine sounds. You slice them so that you can play them, and each slice is a different trig. So basically, I programmed this one to sound this way. My kick is over here, by the way, on track 6, but my drum machine slices are on track 3. And then I also have a track for just hi-hat, so this is the hi-hat that's going on in the background. So this is like a fairly involved pattern that I've designed. Some of these trigs only happen every other time, so that I create sort of a four bar beat. But something else that I did was I assigned my 16th scene. I assigned some new things. Basically, I told it to change the depth of an LFO that was controlling which start point would play. So what this allows me to do is, if it's at 0, nothing is being changed. Every trig is what I've assigned it to be. But the moment I add a depth of 9 to it, I'm telling the machine to follow the LFO and pick in a range of 4 below, 4 above, what slices are actually playing. So it'll take this as a midpoint. So for example, this one is like slice 3. It'll take that as a midpoint, and then it'll play one of those things to the left or right at the rate that the LFO is moving. So this one's moving in this sort of like low to high saw wave. And then on top of that, I even have some trigs that are designed to be muted. Let's see if I can find some. Are they even in here? Maybe not. Never mind. Well, in any case, I basically told it to pick slices that were left and right of slice 15, because when I look at slice 15, we've got what's 4 to the left. Some of my favorite sounds in an 808. You got the rim, you got this little shaker thing, you got the cowbell, and then you got the woodblock. So those are awesome. And then to the right, you have tom, another kick, some other kick options, basically. So those are the things that are playing when I pull this to the right. And this allows me to create some really fun random fills. And so if I combine that with muting the kick, you get the structure for a dance track, basically. So then I have this other scene, and the whole point of this other scene was to automate some of those moves. So Scene 15 actually mutes the kick, so I don't have to do that by hand anymore. Even though it's kind of fun to do that, and it's just sort of a rule of thumb, like don't automate yourself out of the set. But it also adds some additional things. It mutes the hi-hat, which I thought was really nice. And it does something to this. It also mutes this, I guess. Really, the main thing about this particular track is I think it's this one sound that I really enjoy. It's sort of like a whoosh. And it plays every 4 bars, right? But it really gets to shine when you mute everything. All right, so here's some new things. So this track is a, what is this? This is actually a Japanese instrument, like a taiko, I think. Let me just double check. Is it a taiko? No, it's some sort of found sound rhythm. I'll take off some of the effects because right now there's a ton of delay on it. But if you hear it by itself, it's quite simple. But what I have happening on top is I have a delay, but the delay is being manipulated by an LFO, so the time of the delay is shifting as you go, and that's why you get this sort of crazy, this undulating sound. This could use some mixing as well. I feel like the bass sort of gets lost. But what's cool about this is, if you remember, scene 15 mutes a bunch of these things. And then you have this track, which is sort of like, it's honestly at risk of being a little bit too many cool patterns happening at the same time. But I feel like that's part of the craft of performing it as well, is to sort of recognize that some things can come in later. And as I'm performing this, I think one of my bigger roles is to be a DJ, you know, like I'm a DJ with 6 loops going on, and if I think something is getting in the way, then it's my job to identify that and remove it. Right? I'm not sure what this scene does. Oh, I see. It's funny because I guess what happened was that this track was actually originally muted in the scene, right? And so then this crossfader was designed to bring it up. what's going on here. I think it's the kick. Yeah. It's just like a super intense kick version. And part of the reason why I did this was because what's coming next kind of makes sense. So let's move on to pattern 9 here. So this is also one of my favorite patterns in the set. This was inspired by a producer named Anz, A-N-Z, one of my faves. She's from Manchester. She runs an NTS show that you should check out, A-N-Z. And she uses a lot of beats that are kind of like this pattern. But one thing that I've noticed about these beats is that they sort of have like an A section and a B section. So I kind of designed this set to have that. So these 4 kind of alternate. And this crossfader is basically changing which slice I'm playing. So I can rhythmically adjust that. Thank you, Bart. So now we're on pattern 11. This is where the bass comes in from the Minotaur. With this particular distortion, you can hardly hear it, so let's bring some things down. Let's see what, we're at 4 bars. So I kind of have to manually do this, but because I want it to be 8 bars. 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4. So that was kind of like the guiding principle behind this set of patterns was I'm going to switch them every this scene is adjusting this, but then scene 13 is basically just muting. Yes, I would love to do this live again. If you want to check out the original set that I did, it's in my channel. I've linked it in the description. So pattern 13. So I mentioned this earlier. I kind of designed the project to have moments in every bank that would be kind of like a breather, so that I could change the tempo, so that I could play some samples from my microbiology documentary that I really like. And let's see, where is that? Right. This particular loop was just something that I recorded on a synth one time, and it's been sitting on my Octatrack. So let's go into pattern 14, which kind of dovetails from this moment.
What is the process? It is the self-making process.
Yes, I do have some heat on the master bus. This is provided by the plugin on my computer. Normally, when I performed this, I played I used it. Yeah, I actually have a compressor here, an FMR RNC, which is like a very small hardware compressor, and then I was running that into an analog heat, which I just kind of set and forget. I had it to one of the further options. I think it was like, I can't remember what they're called, but in this particular instance, I'm using Unfiltered Audio Dent 2, which is a super good plugin. If you go to Plugin Alliance and check it out, it's a super involved plugin that you can actually create LFOs and assign them different parameters, and it's honestly a great kind of, it's a philosophically similar cousin to like the Octatrack in that sense. But I just have like a distortion running on it that sounds super nice. In this particular section, I have these different patterns running, and they play different chords. Basically, I just have this pad. I have it chromatically triggering different notes based on which pattern. And so as I was making this set, I decided that I would have these patterns that would play sequences, but then when I got to the instrumental part, things would slow down and I would start playing the patterns a slightly different way. So instead of having it sort of move incessantly forward, I kind of have this one memorized in my head where I have these different patterns assigned to different vocal clips that I trigger. There's 6 of them in total, so I designed in my head this way to play them that I think sounds the best. So kind of starting over. Got this one first. And when I did this live, I played this one 3 times, this sort of like cascading loop. I let it run 3 times in a row. Just to kind of give me a breather too, grab some water or a beer or something, which, speaking of which, I'm gonna grab some water. Cool. So this particular sample, I think, is playing from here. No. Maybe it's playing from this track 4. And this is also part of it. So now we're going to trigger these slices.
What is the process? It is the self-making process.
My scene in this situation is slightly slowing down the delay on the vocal.
Components from the environment are taken in and moved around and changed chemically.
The delay increases with the scene. So I can use that to emphasize certain words.
To do what? To make more. Why? To make more. Why? To make more. Life is always expanding, always making more of itself. They call it autopoiesis. That is the self-making. The system itself makes itself.
And so then that carries me into bank 3. You'll notice we're at 164 BPM, but because that last section was so open-ended, it's very difficult to tell that the tempo actually changed. This is another section that sort of has an A-B format to it. And actually, in this particular section, I have 128 step patterns. So this is where I utilize the Octatrack's ability to sequence multiple patterns at once. So if I hit these 2, as I did, it'll just automatically flip between them as the length of the pattern ends. And I believe I have samples here as well, but I start them on the first one. Let's go.
I'm trying to reimagine this person walking toward me out of the mist as a homo bio, a community of interdependent organisms with many interacting genomes, human and bacterial. But it's hard to do. Isn't she really an individual with one set, her own personal set of genes that she inherited from her parents, and which are a blueprint that determine who she is and who she will become?
So this is kind of where I arrive. These 4 patterns are sort of a lead-in. And these scenes are meant to manipulate the breakbeat as before. I'll break this down a little bit. So what's going on here is you have a loop that's playing, but there's also an LFO, and I'm adjusting the depth and speed of that LFO. But the only thing it's changing is this one note, because the LFO is set to synchronize to the pattern. That means it resets at the beginning. So if I put this at a different spot, nothing's going to change until this particular spot, because it has nowhere to trigger, right? And it's interesting because these two patterns actually have different ways of manipulating that particular sample. But they kind of follow the same principle, which is that it'll sound normal until a very specific point where the scene changes what happens. Track 4 is sort of like this shimmery sound, which again is actually just one of the samples from the previous section. That part. It's just pitched. Then we have our tambourine. I'm going to reduce the mix on this distortion for a second. So this is my 808 that's the kick in this situation. And then you can hear more of that LFO slice manipulation here. There's not much else to this pattern. So let's go to the next one. And this one's also a bit more of a transition. You'll notice that as I went through these banks, my relationship to the patterns kind of became a bit more fluid. It was a bit more rigid in the beginning, with beats kind of being one and then the other. And then as I started working on it, I found ways to blend one section into another that were a little more graceful. So this scene is muting the breakbeat, but it's also adding a delay, so you can hear it sort of like trailing. Oh wow, this is super distorted. So yeah, that scene was a bit of a surprise because I have this loop, this sort of like dub loop, muted as part of the scene, and that doesn't matter in pattern 9 because it's not actually playing at first. And in fact, this is P-locked. Damn it, it stopped being p-locked. But it was p-locked to the breakbeat. And then when I moved here, I was triggering the actual dub loop that's assigned to this part. So that's some way that I can actually use this scene to hide something. And then when I bring it back, and you can kind of hear it catching some beats. I didn't actually explore this one too much. I'm not super familiar with dub music, and maybe if I listened to it more, I'd find more ways to kind of play it. But I do know that they like delay, especially space echo. So I did some of that. So this is where I have some piano loops playing. This section gets pretty wacky. Basically, I sampled just a field recording of me playing piano. And this was from like a month or two ago. But then I went in and I created slices. This wasn't an auto slice. I just picked notes, places where notes started, and then I am pretty sure I actually just went in and just did this. Like that, and then just recorded that. This is a different piano sample. But I just kind of layered it on top, and I don't know what I was going for, but I was really just going off of feel. But this next section, if you like the producer Clark, I was inspired by Clark for this part. I should explain this this bass line. This is something that I've been playing with more recently. Bass lines are interesting on the Octatrack in that you, when you're MIDI triggering them, you can assign specific notes, like I have here. The first bar here is pretty much the same every time. But then the second bar is where things get interesting, because these are pretty much just locked to their pitches, and these ones have different depths of an LFO, which is manipulating the note value. The LFO, the notes are assigned to C minor scale, C sharp minor scale, to match what's playing. And so I basically use the first bar as something familiar for the bass line that you can hear over and over again, and you know where you are. Because obviously if you have a random bass line, unless you're working with something like techno where you have like a 4 on the floor, some other kind of anchor, having a bass line that's different notes every time just gets kind of confusing. So I designed this bass line that has one bar that's just the same every time. And then I believe this B is also the same every time, right? Oh, but the other thing about the B is that it plays every other time. So you'll hear it like every 4 bars. The scene is adjusting the delay on this snare. The tambourine. I actually kind of like it with no reverb. The scene lets me cut everything to just kick and bass. This one lets me cut the piano. Which doesn't matter on this pattern because there is no piano. But if I was here, one thing to keep in mind too is that like these scenes, it's easy to get lost, right? Like it's easy to kind of be like, well, what is actually happening and how do you remember what each scene is doing at any moment in the set? I don't always remember, which is kind of stressful, but also kind of part of the fun. I have a general rule of thumb with this particular set where every pattern, every part is 4 patterns, right? And each part starts with scene 16. This is how I design the whole set from start to finish. It doesn't matter where I am in the set. I know that when I move to patterns 1, 5, 9, or 13, I'm starting a new section, and that section will start with scene 16. And I had to take care to reload my parts right before my set and reload the whole set after I finished so that I wouldn't ruin that. Because the idea is this is the scene that I start with, that I can familiarize myself with. And then these additional scenes I sort of came up with as I was playing with each section. So I sort of work my way right to left. And when I run out of scenes, I know I'm ready to move on. That's kind of all I know. Sometimes as I've practiced, I've gotten more used to expecting what's going to happen with these scenes, but it's not a perfect system. I don't have it written down somewhere. It's really just based on feel. So that's part of the chaos of performing this, is knowing that the set will sound good regardless and making sure that the scenes I've designed kind of do that and follow that rule. And then after that, it's really just a matter of feeling it out in the moment, which is something that I've practiced through other things like completely improvised sets. So that's kind of helped me feel a little more comfortable with the idea that I don't actually know what the scenes do. So once I get a sense of what that is, it's like, oh, this would be like a breakdown. So like, even if I don't know what's exactly going on, I can be listening to it and saying, okay, this is like a section that I could alternate every bar to create its own kind of vibe. And that's kind of what I've done here. So moving on to bank 4. Hello, Negative Zeal, welcome. It's been a while. It's also been a while since I've streamed, so. One thing I've noticed with this particular transition is that for some reason the tempo always fucks up when I switch. Like even though it says tempo 164, it plays at this random tempo, and then the moment I switch, it's like the regular tempo. And this happened when I was performing live. I still don't know why it did that. I feel like the best way to remedy this is to straight up create enough chaos that it doesn't matter. Like basically create a moment of space where I can hit stop, switch to bank 4, and then hit play so that the tempo resets. But we could just do that real quick. Let's see. Let's reload the part. Let's create a new scene. I'm gonna take this and extend the reverb of the bass line. I'm gonna mute the kick. Right, something like that, basically. And I could even do that with like my we'll revisit. We're moving into the final act of my set from a couple weekends ago. If you didn't get a chance to watch it, I have it linked in the description of this video. I played downtown at the Love Song, which is attached to another theater. I can't remember what it's called. But anyway, I played a 35-minute set, and this is sort of a walkthrough of that set. This is a section where I continue to sample bits from this film.
If you look at the Earth's atmosphere, it's wildly out of equilibrium. Incredibly, just think that there's methane and oxygen mix. If they're different composition, it would blow up. And something must be regulating, or they wouldn't stay constant.
This is kind of a fun sound. What is this? Not entirely sure what it is, but I love it. And then I have this, where is it? This percussion loop. And I pretty much created 4 slices, 4 vocal samples to trigger along with each pattern. So pattern 2 goes with slice 2. And I didn't automate the sample triggering. I wanted to do that live.
We found that. We showed that but for life, the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere now would be so great that we'd be fried. Life has pumped it down continuously so that it's low. There is a mechanism.
And these are just like slight variations on the same beat. There's not a ton changing here.
We are, through our intelligence and communications, in a way, the nervous system of our planet. We can't help it because we're part of it. So we should be the heart and the mind of the earth, not its malady.
This next pattern I designed because I wanted to be able to play a track that I actually produced. Is it actually gonna play? Oh yeah, there it goes. Let's rewind real quick. So this one is a loop, right? And technically I'm supposed to trigger this fourth one here.
We are through our intelligence and communications.
And I remember I wanted to move on to this.
We can't help it because we're part of it. So we should be the heart and the mind of the earth, not its malady.
The song is called Thalassophobia. It's not released, but it's a track I produced like years ago before quarantine that's kind of inspired by like Daniel Avery and stuff like that. And I thought it would fit nicely here. I don't end up doing very much during this part of the set. I can filter it if I want, but kind of just let it ride. So this is where the song starts to end. And then I'm able to transition into a new section here. Hopefully gracefully, because when I did it live, this was like the part that gave me the most trouble. Okay. No! No, that's exactly what happened. Okay. Well, I'm going to troubleshoot that later, but anyhow, this is the beat that comes after. Kind of sounds like Once in a Lifetime. You may ask yourself. I should do a cover of that song. I just might. For those of you living around LA, I have a show coming up on the 16th of October, and it's for my album release, Present Tense. It's at the Moroccan Lounge, and it will be kind of inspired by David Bowie, Laurie Anderson, talking heads, that sort of thing. It's a very different set from this, by the way. I will be looking for opportunities to play music like this. I have no clue where this... Oh, it's coming from here. Right. Cool. This is not my beautiful wife. This could be a really cool backdrop for like a cover of that. I kind of consider this as like the outro section of this whole project. Because it moves pretty slowly. I don't know what's going on. This was the part that gave me the most trouble, and probably the part that I did the least amount of practicing. Let's see if I can troubleshoot this real quick. Yeah. Yeah, see, this was supposed to be... Somehow it was deleted. Yeah, anywho. Let's just move on to the last section here. This is pretty straightforward. I had this pattern that would slowly become something else. I would adjust the length of the sample triggering, and I would move the retriggering so that it would play a bunch. But it would pick randomly from the slices. So you sort of create this bed of like an ARP type sound. So you have this bass line, and essentially I just linked these three together. So this would form the foundation for the last section. And then at this point I am sampling this part.
Systems thinking is all about feedback loops, where the chain of causality it swallows its own tail, and the dynamics become much more interesting and hard to rationalize in a pure linear cause effect sense.
We also shift the emphasis from isolated objects into
interacting with each other, to the relationships between the objects.
So that life is a connected phenomenon through space. There's
Actually, pause real quick. This was the only time in the set that I actually tried out using scenes in the A section, because I typically keep it at 1. But in this particular section, I actually enjoyed having a place to go that wasn't the baseline. It was actually a different, sorry, I shouldn't say baseline. That wasn't the original point in the track. So I created this scene that would sort of keep this ARP parameter consistent, but would also mute the bass, right? So the instructions in my head are to start with, scene A at 1, scene B at 16, play this, pull this over in this direction. Once I have the ARP going, I play this sample.
Systems thinking is all about feedback loops.
Switch the scene.
Where the chain of causality swallows its own tail and the dynamics become much more interesting and hard to rationalize in a pure linear cause-effect sense.
We also shift the emphasis from isolated objects interacting with each other to the relationships between the objects.
so that life is a connected phenomenon through space. There's no such thing as a fully independent organism, because every organism requires food to be delivered and waste to be removed, so that it's a system on the surface of the Earth.
Then I have this final one that I actually switch to.
I hope there is a scientific revolution going on. Because I suspect that the competition model is eventually going to be lethal.
And that's the whole shebang. Those are the 3 patterns at the very end. And by the time I get to the very end, I have exhausted all of the scenes. And that's how I kind of keep it clear in my mind. The part starts with A at 1, B at 16. And as I pull it to 16, I move A to 5, transition to 5. And then I move this to 13, transition to 13. The reason I have 5 and 13 is because I'm giving myself room to have other scenes that occur before we get to the final transition. It's far enough on the side that I can still feel like I can reach it with my hand. But that's just kind of a system that I came up with. Anyhow, that is the whole thing. Thank you for checking out this walkthrough. I've been talking about it for about 2 hours now. And my goal is to take this recording and actually edit it down into a video that I can then upload. It's something new that I'm trying, just so that things are a little bit more cohesive, because I tend to ramble a little bit. So if I can just break it down into a more concise walkthrough, I will do that. And so thank you for being here for the live stream and taping of that. This video will not be available like the other ones immediately after. I'll probably be hiding that video, or maybe, you know what, I'll just leave it up until I make the edit and then I'll replace it with that. Actually, that'll just be too confusing. I'll just hide the video and then I'll upload the one that is the full edit. Just making things up as I go. So thank you for being present for that, and stay tuned to see the full video when it does come out. What else? There's a lot of things if you want to stick around for some announcements. My single just came out. It's called Can You Feel This? It's part of my upcoming album, Present Tense. And if you could go on Spotify and like it and share it, that would be awesome. Follow me on Spotify to get updates in your, what is it called? Release radar, and in your emails. which would also help me because Spotify is super picky about who they let into playlists and stuff. So the more activity I get on there, the better. What else? I'm affiliated with Patchworks out in Seattle. So if you need gear, definitely check out my description and follow the link to get a discount. And shout out to Tiefling and Tyler Edders, who shared a set or shared a lineup with me on the day that I played this live set. I'm also going to link that here in case people want to see. Whoops. If you want to see the full performance, it's in the chat, and you can check out how the set went down from start to finish without words. And I think that's pretty much everything. Thank you so much for being here. And have a great rest of your day. Peace.